Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at Radiomaster's newest radio, the T8L. It's a compact and light, small form factor sort of remote with the ability to store the stick ends here in the back. You're probably noticing no screen. They have a solution for that. More on that in a minute. It's definitely smaller than my beloved Radiomaster Zorro. It's also smaller than Radiomaster GX12, which is another radio which I like, but yeah, I'm not currently using it as an everyday driver. But do note the size of gimbals. These gimbals are super small. The Zorro gimbals are already considered minis at about 26.5 millimeters. If we're just measuring by the inside diameter, the T8Ls aren't all that much smaller, but they sure look smaller in the radio. Radiomaster says that it weighs 204 grams, but I'm pretty sure that's without batteries. The batteries are stored right underneath these grips with little finger holds that you just pull these off. And of course, there are your 18650 cells, one in each side. Hopefully you can see the prints for spring tension. Directly printed into the back plate here of the radio, and that's so that you can tighten or loosen the spring tension. But in my experience, tightening and loosening those screws in those positions doesn't change it dramatically, so the change will be fairly muted. And while we're here looking at the back, there's no bay if you didn't notice, so you're not adding an external module to this one or external power. You could add external power through the USB port, but you know, that's like a battery bank, not like a typical LiPo plug-in you might do for other radios. At the top, we have a potentiometer over here. We have a 2-position button. We have buttons over here, SA and SD, as well as switches or toggles up here for SB and SC. Of course, we have joysticks for our trim positions. We've got a mode button, which is how we're going to be getting into the configuration, as well as the power button. But do note that these gimbals are pretty short, and as they come out of the box, there is no set screw, so you can't increase the height, which is really small, and I fly as kind of a hybrid pincher. So if I put my fingers in my natural position and I rotate this up, you can see that there is very little clearance as I rotate through. As a matter of fact, sometimes my finger on the backside is rubbing when I go full 100% on the stick. So if you have really big, thick fingers, it's going to be a challenge to get your fingers in this position and not touch the case. We do get lights across the front when we power it on, and these lights tell you how much battery life have by 25%. To get into the configuration mode, because we don't have a little screen right here to configure ExpressLRS, which this is ExpressLRS, and it goes from 10 milliwatt to 100 milliwatt. So I wouldn't suggest this for super long range flight, but 100 milliwatt with ExpressLRS will get you a very far distance with the right setup. To get into the configuration mode, I'm going to press and hold the M button down and then power it on. Now I'm going to take my USB cable and I'm going to plug it in right to the top to the USB-C port, which is what we would also do if we wanted to charge or use it for a simulator. And we do have to go to this web page. You can see it up here in my URL. It's radiomaster-rc.github.io/rm-web-page/connection.html for those that might just be listening along. You do need a Chrome-based browser. I did confirm that this does not work in Firefox. We're going to click connect, and then we see we get this prompt. We got a COM port up here from our radio being connected in that mode that we pressed it into. And it beeps to tell us that you're connected. And here is where you've got some basic settings. You've got your volume control. Let me turn that down. I'm a low volume sort of guy, and it gives you a little tone. If you didn't hear that on my radio, each time I let go, it gives us a little sample. Low power warning is on. We could turn these things on and off. I'm not going to go through every little thing. They have a calibration feature. You can see with my throttle stick, it's not dead centered. That's probably because I loosened the springs too much. But you can see it's pretty interesting. It moves around here on screen, and this is how you can do the calibration as well. Whee! Moves pretty quickly. You can see it's sagging there a little bit at the bottom. That's, again, I noticed that when I was loosening the springs, that sometimes it will sag. I can get it to the center position. There we go. Now my hands are off, and it's centered. But yeah, it doesn't, you got to work with your, I like really loose, sloppy gimbals. So that being kind of saggy doesn't bother me that much because I'm going to actively have my fingers on it while I'm flying. RF settings. This is another place where you might want to go and enable the Wi-Fi. So if you wanted to flash ExpressLRS on this radio via the ExpressLRS application that we download and use for ExpressLRS. We just click Start. We can also set the binding phrase via Wi-Fi. That's where you would set this up rather than being in here. And you have your other settings that you would typically find when you go into the radio. Packet rate, telemetry ratio, switch mode, link mode, all these other things. You also have a bind button right here as well. And so this should have you covered for most of the ExpressLRS settings, as well as the radio settings. But it is a little bit different than what we experience when we have a screen. And I actually kind of think that they should redesign this webpage or give this webpage a secondary look that looks more like what we're used to when running the Lewis script for ExpressLRS on a screen on a radio. That way, if somebody were to have this radio and move from this radio to something else, that process would be less jarring because you would also have a lot of that familiarity of how the look and feel and how that Lewis script operates when you have a screen on the radio. But this definitely works, and it's much better than having to do certain button presses and waiting for tones and maybe lights on the radio in order to tell us what we've selected before we move on to the next phase of whatever configuration change we're trying to make. We also have a channel monitor like you would typically find. So our sticks, obviously, 9, 6, let's move our potentiometer. That's 10 down here, the little slider at the top. And then our toggles. So we've got a typical 10-channel switch. You can change the sub-trims, the channel mapping, channel settings, and the mode. By default, mode 2 is what most radios are shipping in, but not everybody flies in mode 2, and some people find through struggling through mode 2 that switching to one of the other modes just speaks to them, and so they use that. As weird as that might be for some of us that have been only flying mode 2. And then the last but not least, we have our firmware updater. We look right here. We've got the internal ExpressLRS module as well as the T8L controller, and then we click the Start Firmware. I think if there was a firmware update, it would appear here. Let me click this button and just see what happens. I haven't done this part before. So I have to reconnect. Please wait for denied. Oh, so this is where you would drag your firmware into here rather than it just fetching it. I think that's something else that this web page could also do. Just kind of looking at the dynamic of a web page. Why can't the web page detect the controller that we've got, detect the version that we're running, because we've already given it access to the COM port, and then download the file that we would need to flash the firmware, whether it's for the internal radio or for the radio overall. That seems like it would streamline this process a little bit better. So another suggestion that you let me know down in the comment section on my suggestions and support them or don't. And then if Radiomaster does come along and take a look, maybe they will take some of the suggestions, all the suggestions, and we'll see a change in the near future for this radio as well as any potential others that they might be planning to use this particular web sort of connection or configuration changes. The gimbals are quad ball bearing Hall effect gimbals, and as far as their use goes, they feel like normal, pretty, hobby grade is the best sort of term I think we can use. It's not toy grade. It doesn't feel like it's going to be less precise than, say, any of my other gimbals. The big difference between these gimbals and the next step up, at least in my opinion, would be the all aluminum CNC gimbals that Radiomaster makes for their radios that we saw on the other two radios, the GX12 and the Zorro that I showed in this video. Those are just they're very premium. They're expensive, but they're very smooth, and they still have the same precision, if maybe not a touch more precision than a Hall effect gimbal. But Hall effect gimbals were kind of the standard. They were the highest or one of the higher grade gimbals that we had in FPV for the longest time. This does come in 3 different colors. We have the gray in front of us. We also have white and blue. Should have requested the blue for review, shouldn't I? As far as the price point, I don't know what that is just yet. I will have a link down in the video description. As you know, I normally put together a stick cam for this, and while I did try my super old Firefly knockoff GoPro, kept stopping the recording just after a few seconds. So it might be time to maybe actually get a GoPro or find some other sort of chest mount rig for this. But I failed in recording a stick cam. I tend to do actual flight rather than just using radios on a simulator with the computer for getting used to it and the feel for these sorts of things for making a video about them. I tend to actually fly them, but I did plug this into a simulator. It worked just normally as a human interface device on my Windows 11 based computer. So the functions of the radio, as far as I can tell, work fine. I think the biggest concerns would be some people just can't do without the screen, even with the web UI. You know, web UI is going to limit you to having, at the very least, I think, an on-the-go cable as well as your phone to be able to use that URL and be able to change the configuration on this. That might not work. That's something I haven't tested. I have an iPhone, and the cables I tried did not work. So with Android, it might be a different experience. So the screen might hold you back, and the length of the stick ends that come stock with this might hold you back. You can replace those, but when it comes to reviews, I don't make changes or modifications outside of the spring tension because that's something I like. But when you take the screws, the stick ends off, it's flat all the way down, and then you just pop them in the back. I didn't find, in my experience, where the stick ends would come out of their little holsters in the back, and you can tell with the length of the stick end, they are either trying to accommodate people buying longer stick ends, or they have some stick ends they're planning for this coming in the near future maybe, but they do screw in versus other kinds of stick ends that might be out there. So you're going to have to buy something similar for these gimbals in order to make them longer, especially if you have big thick fingers and you hybrid or pinch like I do. I think your fingers are going to rub a little bit or a lot, depending upon, again, the size of your finger and the size of the stick end. But that's something you kind of have to determine. My fingers aren't necessarily any thicker than the average man's. I'm not a large human by any stretch, or at least not as large as I used to be as far as overall body. But my hands, I wear a large glove, but I've never had anyone tell me I have big fingers or anything like that. So hopefully that helps you a little bit more. But if you're interested in this, I'll have a link down in the video description to Radiomaster's website on this product. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise about the Radiomaster T8L, their newest radio on the market, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.